No. All right. Could you please state and spell your name for the record, please?
Emilia, Emilia.
And would you describe your relationship to this case?
For the trip to Cyprus, I was Desdemona's lady-in-waiting. I attended her for the duration of the trip, and I was around her 95% of the time while we were there.
And what is your exact relationship to the victim, Desdemona?
Well, I just became closely acquainted with her during the trip to Cyprus, but we got very close on the boat ride over, and in our time there, we shared a lot with each other. So relatively new friends, but I hold her very dearly in my heart.
And what is your opinion of Desdemona?
Well, I love her very much. I think she's so sweet and kind, but she's a little young. She has a lot to learn, a little green.
And what was your opinion of the accused Othello?
Well, I didn't know Othello personally very well. We were acquainted because of my husband's friendship with him, but during the trip to Cyprus, his behavior toward Desdemona was, I would say, detestable. I do not think that he was right for her.
And so can you go into more detail about how you felt about their relationship?
Well, Desdemona and I had a lot of time to talk while we were there, and this trip came immediately after their marriage, and I think it all happened very quickly. They had met several times because of Brabantio inviting him to her house and to talk at dinner, but I think it just fell together very quickly. And I'd only ever seen them together for a brief period of time after we arrived to Cyprus, and things seemed fine then, but as we stayed longer, it became very clear that he was mistreating her.
So did you believe their relationship was happy?
Well, like I said, when we got off the boat to Cyprus, things seemed great. He received her very well, and they seemed excited to see each other. But in the days following, it became clear that he was emotionally neglecting her, and physically as well. There were some incidents to follow after our arrival. It didn't seem to be healthy at all. It seemed deteriorating very quickly.
Did you think Othello was capable of harming Desdemona?
Well, he's in the army, so he's obviously capable of violence that comes with the job. And based on what Desdemona had told me, I didn't think so, but after we arrived, it became very clear that he was capable of hurting her. The day before she was murdered, he, in fact, hit her.
Do you know any details about that incident?
Well, I know he confronted her. There were accusations that she was unfaithful, and there was a rather heated discussion about that with them, which ultimately resulted in his striking her.
And did you ever witness or hear Othello insult or demean Desdemona?
Directly, maybe a few times, but what I knew most of it was what Desdemona directed to me in conversation. She was very distraught as our time there went on. She was very upset by the way he was treating her, and I knew that he was suspicious of her in some ways. We had a conversation. He was very direct in asking me about whether or not she'd ever been alone with Cassio. So the suspicion there obviously doesn't indicate a healthy relationship. So,
do you know, or were you witness to him ever directly calling her a name like a whore or a strumpet or anything of that nature?
Yes, there was an incident there, and afterwards my husband and I had to kind of work that out with Desdemona. She was very upset by that. she's not capable of anything like that at all. She's just so pure-hearted, and so obviously that was very confusing to her and very upsetting.
Can you describe the night of the murder in as much detail as you can?
Yeah. That day was very long and strange. That was, in fact, the day that he struck her, I believe. So things were rapidly unfolding. So there was that incident that I mentioned before, that heated discussion between the two of them, and then I went to attend on her that evening, and obviously she'd been very upset about the way Othello had treated her all day. And I could tell that something was wrong. She had something on her mind. And before this too was Othello's questioning of me. He was, like I said, very intentional about asking me whether or not Desdemona had been unfaithful, if I had seen any remnants of that in our conversations. And so I went to attend on her that night, and she was very upset. She was singing these songs. You could tell she had a lot on her mind, and she wasn't all there. She wasn't all there. And she told me that Othello commanded her to send me away, which was very unusual. Every night I had helped her get ready and sat with her before she went to bed. So I was there with her, and Othello came and sent me out of the room. He commanded me to go away. And so while I went to the hall, and while I was in the hall, I learned that Roderigo had been killed. And I didn't know if Othello had known of this, and so I ran to tell him. And I got to the door, and the door had been locked. And I thought that was strange to me. Usually that's just, that wasn't how things had been done in our visit there. And I was banging on the door. I was trying to get inside, and I heard a struggle inside. I didn't hear any words or any screams per se, but there were some thuds. I could tell that something was going on. So finally, there was a lull, and Othello let me in the room, and I told him that Roderigo had been killed. And he asked me if Cassio had been killed as well, which I thought was a strange question. But I looked to the bed, and I noticed Desdemona stirring, and she started mumbling things like falsely murdered, indicating her death. And so I asked her to speak and to tell me more. I had no idea what was going on, and then she stopped breathing and speaking. And I turned to Othello, because Othello had been the one in the room, and he looked at me, and he said, "'Twas I that killed her." And so that opened up a whole other discussion. I asked him why he would do such a thing. I mean, she had done nothing whatsoever to deserve that. And I learned that my husband had something to do with the whole thing. And I was shocked that he had killed her, and so I screamed. I wanted help. This murderer was in my presence, and everyone else kind of from the hall ran in, and Desdemona was there, and so obviously everyone was just as confused as I was, and even Othello revealed to the group that he killed her with his hands, and then everything gets kind of hazy after that.
So just to be clear, just to make sure, Othello said to you directly that he had killed Desdemona?
Yes.
All right. After he had admitted that, did he threaten you in any way? Obviously, you would be frightened in this situation, but was he overtly threatening in any way?
Well, afterwards, the energy in the environment was not necessarily a positive one. My husband kept asking me to be quiet about information I had. He threatened me, and everyone emotions were definitely on edge. So, yes.
And do you recall anything else after, I guess, the people entered, or is that when it starts to go crazy for you?
Well, I know until a certain point, I know that Othello mentioned in front of everyone, he addressed Desdemona's uncle,
Mm-hmm.
and said that he admitted again that he had killed her. And then yes.
Is there anything else that you recall that you believe would be important to share about either the night of the murder or Desdemona or Othello?
All I would really say again is that Desdemona did nothing to deserve her fate. I saw nothing, and I would never suspect her of anything that would indicate any sort of unfaithfulness to Othello.
Okay, thank you so much.
More questions for you. Now, you said you were Desdemona's waiting lady.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly, can you tell us a little bit more about what that job entailed?
Yes, I was there to help her get ready for her days, and in her days at night, get her ready for bed. More, not superficial things, but help her throughout the day. But also, a very large part of our relationship in that was just to keep her company and talk to her and attend to her in any way she may need.
All right, so you attended her a lot. So you were with her at the dock when Othello came in after the Turkish fleet sank.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're married to Iago, correct?
Yes.
Can you tell us about how he was acting during that time at the dock?
He was very clever. We got into word games a little, but he was also very critical of me, which I'm not. I'm no stranger to that. So I kind of disengaged from that conversation at that point. I just, you get to a point where you don't want to deal with that anymore. But he and Desdemona were having a very kind of fun and interesting conversation. But I don't know, he was not the nicest.
So let's just talk about just overall in general your relationship with Iago. How was it generally, aside from like that one instance at the dock?
Well, our marriage is tough, and I am the frequent subject of his criticism. Like I said, he's not very kind. So that is something that I've lived with for several years now, being his wife. But when we arrived to Cyprus, he was especially demanding and critical of me, like I've said, not very supportive. He was asking me to do strange things I didn't understand, and he just wasn't around me very much. He was always off on business or with his, friends in the army.
You said he's asking you to do strange things. Do any of those stand out to you?
He continually asked me to retrieve Desdemona's handkerchief.
Did you do this for him?
Not immediately. I had opportunities to, she loved it. She had it with her all the time, and I was with her all the time. And I didn't understand, so I didn't want to do anything that, I never know what he's got going on in his head. So I didn't know what he was up to, but at one point she did drop it. Othello was feeling ill, and she tried to aid him with it, but they got caught up in an argument. And so she kind of left it by the wayside, and I was so tired of always being the butt of Iago's jokes, or doing things wrong, or not being good enough for him. So I had an opportunity to take it, and I did.
All right, I'd like to talk about the night of Desdemona's death. Now, you were with her just before she died, right? Actually, I want to go back to before Othello entered the room. You were helping her out, getting ready for bed, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. And then Othello came in, as we talked about, and asked you to leave. And can you tell me again what you heard going on inside?
Well, I heard I didn't hear any specific words or a conversation. You know, I had heard of Rodrigo's death, and so I was dealing with that for a moment, but once I got to the door, obviously it was locked, and I couldn't go immediately inside, so I heard just the slightest struggle. Nothing too violent sounding, but I heard like a thud, and then I heard the curtains close, and there was a silence, and then I was permitted in the room.
Permitted, so Othello opened the door to let you in.
Mm-hmm.
And he was by the door, and you let him know that Rodrigo had been killed. Mm-hmm. And it was at this point that you heard Desdemona trying to say something about being murdered. And it's at this point that she died, correct?
Yes.
And Othello was by you at the door at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then Desdemona actually said that she had murdered herself, correct?
She said something about falsely murdered, and she was trying to get words out, and that's what it sounded like, but she was not coherent. It wasn't very clear.
Okay. And then Othello first said that he had not murdered her. And then you seemed to change and then admit to it, correct?
Yes.
And you two started an argument, and that's when some guards busted in along with Iago, correct? And then you and Iago got into an argument.
Yes.
And it says here that you were murdered at this point. Who was that by?
My husband.
So Iago did it.
Yes.
Thank you.